quite an incredible journey. So from, originally two guys in China exploring blockchain to all these banks piling in to joining Blade Master startup to sitting in a room with executives from a top 10 stock exchange. And we had to sort of start pinching ourselves and asking, is this really happening? Is this, a serious, are they being serious? And they were, absolutely, we're not. Yeah.
Is this a hidden camera TV show? Yeah.
Pranking us.
Yeah.
And they used an Australian version of the phrase, we're not messing around.
Hey there, good people in crypto land. I'm Matt Leising, and this is my podcast, Decent People. Welcome to the conversation. On today's show, I'm talking to Dan O'Prey, the Chief Product Officer for crypto at Bakkt. Bakkt is an effort that came out of Intercontinental Exchange, one of the world's biggest futures markets, that was originally intended to offer investors a way to buy and sell Bitcoin futures that would then actually get physically delivered to that investor when the contract settled. So it was a way for more conservative investors to get access to Bitcoin on a regulated market. It has since branched out to loyalty programs and connecting a company's customers with crypto payments with customers such as MasterCard and Wyndham Hotels. Before Dan was at Bakkt, he was the Chief Strategy Officer at Digital Asset, which was made famous for a couple of things. The first was when it hired as its Chief Executive Officer Blythe Masters, who was very well known on Wall Street from her time at JP Morgan. Digital Asset then went on to secure a huge contract with the Australian Stock Exchange to move some of its back office operations onto a blockchain. Dan came to Digital Asset through Hyperledger, which was one of the early kind of bank conglomerate enterprises that was trying to work with large banks and other financial institutions to figure out how they could integrate blockchain into their operations. So as you can see, Dan has been on the forefront of this area of blockchain that's sometimes called distributed ledger technology or enterprise blockchain, which involves really well-known global companies trying to figure out if they can become more efficient and save money by putting some of their operations on a blockchain. So, with all that said, I hope you enjoyed the episode and thank you for listening. Hey Dan, how you doing? Welcome to the show.
I'm great, thank you. Thank you, Matt, for having me. Looking forward to it.
Yeah. So right off the bat, I was doing a little research on you and I saw that you went to Sheffield University. So I have to ask if you are a supporter of Sheffield United.
I'm from London originally, so I'm actually a West Ham United fan who have a bit of a controversial history with Sheffield United, but did follow Sheffield Wednesday a little bit when I was there. I lived near Hillsborough.
Yeah, that's what I was that's my favorite name, I think, in all of team sports is Sheffield Wednesday. Do you, where does that come from? Why, is there a story behind that you know of?
I don't actually, no. I think I may have known once upon a time, but I've forgotten now.
Yeah.
There's been some significance with their founding yeah.
So as a football supporter, it strikes me, I've been watching the Premier League for a really long time, and in England, soccer's not really a sport. It's like part of life. Is that, am I getting that right as an observer from far away? Like I fell in love with Welcome to Wrexham, and I think that's a really great intimate look at how important soccer clubs are to, either small towns or folks in London. But it just seems like it's just part of the fabric of English life.
Very much so, yeah. I mean, it's your sort of go-to with anyone new you meet. It's just part of who you are and where you're from. And I actually grew up in Wimbledon in London, and unlike in the US where franchises sort of move around, that was one of the first teams that was a Premier League team that got relocated to Milton Keynes, and I remember that was really damaging to the community, and obviously fans were incredibly angry.
Yeah. You saw that when there was that talk of like a European Super Bowl, lost their minds.
That was a curious few days before it got cancelled.
Yeah. As a Liverpool supporter in the US, it was kind of took me aback because it just seemed like, I don't know, it's an idea, but like it just seems like God, it's actually like the fabric of life over there, incredibly seriously.
Yeah, and the multi-league structure with the lower league clubs. It's not all about the Premier League and the Big Four or Big Six or whatever it is these days.
Yeah.
And the European elite. It's that romance that any club like Wrexham, can get backing and get promoted and promoted and promoted and end up winning the league or winning the European Champions League. Whereas the Super League was a little exclusive for the big guys.
Yeah, and as a Liverpool supporter, I'd really like this season to just go away. I'd like to start over again, but we don't have to get into
As a
that.
West Ham fan, it could be worse, trust me. So,
What was it like growing up in London when you were a kid? Was that did you have fond memories of it? Can you tell me just a little bit about like life there and your family and what you guys were up to?
yeah, very fond memories. So born in Wimbledon and went to school sort of at the top of my road, so everything very local. Yeah, right on the suburbs of London, so yeah, still pretty suburban, but not central London. But very much enjoyed it. Very much loved growing up there. Um, you know, I moved around quite a bit when I got older. So actually, I just got back from London last night. It was the first time I'd been back there in about 4 or 5 years. So need to get back more often, but also reminded me it's been a while and not as familiar with it as I used to be.
Yeah, how has it changed over the years from when you were a kid?
Pretty similar. Still very grey and rainy. The last week I was there. But I think a lot more of the sort of tech industry is starting to grow there, which is great to see. Not as finance dominated as it used to be and dependent as it used to be. But by and large, it was kind of just like being back home, back from the old days. Not a lot that had changed.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm from Los Angeles. That's where I am now, and you meet people from London and L.A. and they never go back. Because they see the sun here, and they're like, "Oh my God, I'm not leaving." Quite a little
Growing up when I would
expat.
absolutely, yeah, no. Once we get out, we rarely come back. And I used to feel everyone gave London a bad rap for the weather, and it wasn't that bad. But now, having lived in nicer places, going back there, it really does strike you, and have to admit it is true. So, if
Yeah,
I lived in LA, wouldn't think about it.
yeah. I was joking. We've got a writer who lives in London, and he's an American. And I have weekly calls with him at it's like 4 o'clock his time, but it's dark outside, and I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's why the pub culture exists, because you're gonna go get a pint once the sun goes
You need
down.
it.
Yeah. And it's interesting what you say about London as more of a tech center, because it's been interesting to watch different regulators around the world, and the UK or English regulatory system seems to be on the forefront in crypto. At least the Bank of England seems kind of taking it maybe more seriously, or understanding it a little more deeper than other regulatory agencies around the world. Is it? Are you picking up on that? Do you think that they're kind of leading the way in any sort of like crypto regulation?
I think so. Yeah, I think the UK government generally has been pretty good with sort of digital initiatives and the payment rails over there. Chip and pin and touch to pay and real time payments. It's always been ahead of a lot of the world. And the UK government, in terms of filing your taxes or applying for your driver's license, is a relatively consumer tech like experience these days. And then, as you say, the Bank of England have been looking into to crypto generally, and then CBDCs more specifically for quite some time now, 5 6 years maybe plus. And recently looked, I believe they're actually hiring a head of CBDCs as well, so taking it very seriously. And the FCA have always been good with sort of regulatory sandboxes for enabling innovation to happen in a safe and responsible way. And then just seeing what's happened over there as well with the neo banks, with Monzo and Revolut and others,
Yeah.
has become quite a big thing. Whereas in the US, it's a lot harder for challenger financial entities to sort of get into the market.
Yeah, and we've been writing a little bit at Decential about Hong Kong as well. They seem to be kind of moving forward pretty quickly. They're moving forward on stablecoin regulation, and I think they're trying to carve out a spot for themselves in the sort of crypto global landscape. Um, so
Absolutely.
yeah, growing up as a kid, did you envision yourself going into the tech space or the financial world, or what were your kind of aspirations back then?
Definitely, yeah. Financial world wasn't the goal. Generally, I was entrepreneurial as a kid. I always had a lot of projects and selling things at school and trying to make money however I could. My father was actually in the telecommunications space and still is, doing a startup age 70, so he can't stop. But he was in early in the sort of modem space. So that obviously, I was one of the first kids at school to get the internet, which was a pretty big deal, and generally to get most of the new gadgets. So always was fascinated by technology and the potential and how life changing it was. And I think it's also awesome to be one of the last generations to have seen life pre and post internet and how everything has changed. So always entrepreneurial, always generally very, very interested in tech and getting an early taste of that.
Yeah, that's a great point. I remember, if you wanted to, like, I don't know, when I was a kid, I wanted to buy a bike or a surfboard or something. We had this thing in LA called the Recycler, and it was literally printed, and it was just nothing but classified ads. And you'd go through by section and you'd look, and try to find something you wanted and call that person on the phone and, have to bring cash. Today, they don't know how easy they've got it.
Totally different world.
Yeah, yeah. So, and then just one last question. Like, Wimbledon is where the tennis tournament is. Is that like the same? That's why it's got the name there. Is that?
Yep. Yeah, that's what it's famous for.
Sure.
Yes.
Were you into that as a kid? Did you play tennis at all, or was that on your radar?
A little bit, yeah. I like to follow it. Been to the Wimbledon tournament a couple of times, but really soccer was sort of all encompassing in terms of my sporting interest. There's so much time and energy to be spent just in there that didn't really have much left for a second sport, but always enjoyed playing it and watching it when the tournament was on.
And so you played soccer as well as a kid?
Yeah, played a lot of soccer. I was actually forced to play rugby as well because that was the preferred sport at the school I went to. So they, being I'm 6'6", and they always forced me into being in the scrum as a prop, which I didn't particularly enjoy because it was freezing and just got hurt all the time. But as soon as I could go back to focusing on soccer, I did. Absolutely.
Yeah, my wife played it in college, and one day she woke up in the infirmary, like out, like just she had no idea what happened, and woke up like with a nurse asking her who the president was. So,
wow,
yeah,
wow, scary stuff.
I want to set the record straight. Soccer is actually an English term for it, and I know we get a lot of shit here in the United States for adopting soccer and not football, but I just looked this up to make sure I was right, and I remembered it correctly. It's an Oxford slang from the word association, which was, I think, how most soccer clubs got started in the 1800s as associations, right?
Absolutely, yeah. It's a association football to distinguish it from rugby's also sometimes referred to as football as well. So yeah, soccer comes from association, as you say.
All right.
But we don't use it anymore, so I still, even though I live in the US, I try and say football. So
yeah. And people sneer at me when I say soccer. Like, English folks are like, it's football. Shut up. So you have an entrepreneurial kind of streak in you. Your dad is doing a startup at 70. That's amazing. And then, so you had a modem and you're connecting probably through dial-up back in the day. Did that, like a lot of people that I've spoken to on this podcast, the computer kind of really opened up a new world to them, and especially when they became internet enabled. Was that the same sort of thing for you?
Absolutely, yeah. I became obsessed any spare minute. I was on my computer. I was, downloading whatever I could, printing it out, selling it, or started, light programming back in Visual Basic way back in the day, and just the ability to create and get access to things which were, orders of magnitude more than I could do in the real world became an obsession.
I remember the freedom too of, entering a chat room, whoever you wanted to be, you can try on new personas and, and potentially connect to people who, were brilliant about things and you could learn in all new ways. Obviously there were downsides to that as well, but it did just open up this whole new universe. So, and then,
Absolutely.
yeah. And so were you headed towards computer science for college and university? Was that sort of something you wanted to pursue more?
It's something I touched on. Yeah, I'd sort of say I'm lightly technical. I've probably always been more or slightly on the commercial business side of things, but with enough technical understanding to not to produce anything of value, but to at least understand what people are talking about and work with people who are technical. So I ended up studying business management and information management, and part of that was slightly technical, but not a proper computer science degree.
One of your earlier jobs was at a place called Madeira Cloud. It was a software as a service company. Were you actually in Beijing for that position?
Yeah, I moved to Beijing when I was about 25. So this was sort of just after, well, a few years after the financial crisis. So London was pretty gloomy. There wasn't a lot of opportunity. Everything was pretty depressing. I then had met my now wife in England, who's American, and sort of figured we were going to go and settle down somewhere and have kids, and that would be it. And we'd sort of be in that place forever, or for a while. So we thought, before we do that, let's go to somewhere neutral, as out there and different as we can find. And a couple of friends had actually ended up moving to Beijing previously and were telling me about it. So we just thought, let's go there for a year. Ended up meeting a Chinese guy, just from an advert on the internet, who had an idea to start a company, and in the cloud computing space. So got in touch with him, and we ended up starting a company together with a couple of his friends, in the sort of software as a service for managing cloud computing infrastructure.
What was it like in Beijing at that time? I'm just really curious about China and anyone I speak to about what life was like, what was business like. Can you just tell me? I'm just really curious about that.
It was, at the time, the opposite of London in that everything was booming, right? There was money going around everywhere, buildings going up, a lot of, excitement and growth and development and opportunity. This was post-Beijing Olympics by a couple of years, so they'd just done a lot of modernization as well. But everywhere you went, there were, buildings being created, skyscrapers going up, hustle, bustle, and real sort of energy for, becoming a center of the world. So I absolutely, loved that energizing piece.
I should know this, but did China sort of miss the financial crisis? Were they not as affected as the Western economy?
I think that they were definitely hit economically, but it was never, Hong Kong was a finance hub and probably got hit, more directly. Its dependency of that industry. But London, Hong Kong, New York, obviously saw more of the brunt of it. But yeah, economically it definitely slowed down and hit, but it was still booming a couple of years.
But it wasn't like Chinese mortgages were suddenly all in peril, like in the U.S. or.
No, they culturally tend to have a more culture of savings rather than credit. I think that's probably shifted now, and credit's become a bigger and bigger thing. But a lot of mortgages were less of a big thing. People would save up and buy houses, the old-fashioned way. So I don't believe, yeah.
It's nice if you can do it.
Yeah.
Was it? Did you face much corruption, or like how were things like on a business level and just terms of doing business with other Chinese firms or the general environment? What was that like?
Yeah, so they have they're obviously pretty state involved in more so in certain sectors of the economy. So in finance, banking, they're all either state owned or partially state owned or unofficially state owned entities. Within the tech sector, it was a lot freer. And, it is an area that they saw strategically valuable to foster in their country. So, on a day-to-day basis, there was a lot of, hoops and structural things that we had to figure out in order to do business there. But by and large, it was relatively free and open within the pure tech space.
So you planned to go there for a year, stay for a year, or were you there for a little bit longer once you started the?
A little bit longer, yeah. We started that company, and then we ended up getting funding, and then growing that company. So I ended up staying for about 4.5 years overall. Had my son was born over there, which was a different experience. But yeah, so I ended up staying for 4.5 years, two companies, one son, two dogs, and a cat. Later, we became sort of most of our formative life. Yeah.
Yeah, there's just a really interesting story in the New York Times the other day about a woman who she's a fashion designer and moved to China and ended up raising her kids in China with her husband. And her point was that she feels that communist state, like for all its sort of drawbacks, did a very good job of raising her kids in terms of like the respect tradition and elders and just a lot of different things that are very kind of, I think, drilled into people, in that society. So I found that really interesting and made me think about it in a new way.
Yeah, that was one of the nice things about living there was the culture. Right? Everyone is extremely hardworking. There was very little crime, other than bikes getting stolen all the time. There was no fear of violence or break-ins or anything like that. Everyone was super nice and super respectful by and large. So it certainly was a very, unlike the West, where you got to worry about certain things. It really was just didn't even occur that something like it, might be crime.
Here, doing lockdown drills at schools, false alarms, it's just terrifying. It just feels like control over it whatsoever. So,
Absolutely.
were you then? So, I think we're probably getting into the era of Bitcoin at some point along this journey.
Hmm.
Did you? So, I want to get to what you were doing with Hyperledger, but tell me, how did crypto first come across your radar?
Yeah, so it was exactly around that time during Madeira Cloud, where we're in the cloud computing space. Obviously reading up on latest technology very frequently. Remember seeing an article, I think it's probably the white paper, was posted on Hacker News. This was probably around 2013, 12, 13. I have some vague memories of downloading the client and running it, but unfortunately can't find any old wallets that are filled with hundreds of Bitcoin. But I think what struck me. Actually, in London, I got a bunch of old laptops, so I was thinking of getting them all the old chargers and just checking just in case I happened to. But I had also been getting super into economics around the time as well, which sort of led me to Austrian economics and just thinking about things in a different way, coming from the land of Keynes and growing up and going through financial crises. I've been doing a lot of reading around economics generally, and then seeing the intersection between some of the concepts that I'd started to be coming across on the economic side, combined with new protocol and super interesting, elegantly designed technology. It really sort of hit the sweet spot for me, personally. Professionally, I ended up leaving the cloud computing company after a few years, and then was looking to do another startup in the space. But startup, thought about doing it in Bitcoin, but this was 2014 by that point, and really the big companies were exchanges or payment processes, neither of which I had any idea of how to create or run. So that sort of led me to exploring other opportunities.
Yeah, the infrastructure was just really super basic back then, wasn't it? And then so I wanted to get into, because you've had quite a run here now in I don't know if you like to call it distributed ledger technology or enterprise blockchain, but it's that idea. It's the idea that's where I started getting into it as a reporter, reporting on Wall Street, like a lot of the banks and asset managers and others were thinking about, like, we can use this like distributed system to our benefit, to streamline efficiencies and make things a lot cheaper and faster. But they couldn't, obviously, because they're highly regulated. They couldn't any network where they didn't know who they were transacting with. So they, this distributed ledger or enterprise block, when you know everyone in your network, and it's, you've done KYC and the AML stuff on them. And early on, I got to tell you, I thought that might have been where we would have seen some of the first big breakthroughs in this tech. There's so much and so much money to be saved if shorten the closing time or days to, say, 3 minutes. The banks and others could save hundreds of millions of dollars a year, if not more. I think it's safe to say that didn't really pan out yet. But tell me about, like, when you went to Hyperledger, which, for listeners, that was it's a project out of the Linux Foundation, right?
It is now, yeah. It started as an independent company and then ended up being acquired by Digital Asset. And we worked with IBM and the Linux Foundation to create a new open source project. So there's sort of two Hyperledgers. There's Hyperledger, the first sort of enterprise blockchain as a standalone company, and now as a much larger open source project of the Linux Foundation.
Yeah. Where's the progress that you've seen in that part of the blockchain world? Like, do you feel like that's still an avenue that people are exploring, or do you think things are shifting to more of a public blockchain, application with privacy controls that some people are working on, like JP Morgan or ZK Snarks can help, make sure that you're not giving away any information to parties that you don't want to be giving away? Is it still moving in that direction, do you think?
I think it's definitely shifted towards the public chain side, as you say. Back then, very much, you couldn't really talk to entities about crypto because they would immediately dismiss you as being crazy. So the sort of mantra became, blockchain, not Bitcoin. Or when we first had a meeting, it's like, don't worry, we're not here to talk to you about Bitcoin. We're just talking about the technology behind Bitcoin that has other use cases. And you almost had to start with, forget everything you know, forget everything you've heard. Let's start from scratch and reset and build from there. So yeah, back to your earlier question about sort of getting into finance, that was never a goal. But after we started Hyperledger, just to explore what else this tech could be used for, very quickly, the banking world started piling in, and there was a really immense amount of interest, which pulled us further and further into that world. But yeah, I think it's probably fair to say it hasn't lived up to the hype or the promise yet. TBD to what extent it does. But back then, very much, again, as you say, it was about, we need to know not just who our customers and who the users are transacting on the platform, but who are the vendors, right? Even the concept of relying on a miner and having no one to call if there were a network issue is just so alien, and in some cases still not plausible or not palatable for enterprise or financial institution customers. But more and more experimentation, I'd say, over time has shifted from the private or enterprise blockchain world to the public chains.
Yeah, you mentioned the blockchain, not Bitcoin debate, and I have a pretty strong memory of that. That was the first article I tried to write for Bloomberg when I started covering blockchain back then, and it was probably way too long, and my editor spiked it, and I got really mad. But I think looking back, it was probably really pretty boring. But yeah, some of the debates back then were, kind of like, it reminds me of what people say about academia, that doesn't mean anything. But I'm not saying that about, but I think in the early stages, it was a lot smaller and a lot less, global and well known as it is now.
Yeah, and I think there was a religious element to it almost, but also there was a feeling that they were right. And when we started Hyperledger, I still loved Bitcoin and I still thought it was interesting and great. I just didn't at that time think it was the be all and end all. So to me, they were parallel or complementary or even sort of just totally different. But there was a feeling within the crypto space that enterprise blockchain was sort of stealing its limelight and its investment and its interest and vice versa. So there was a natural sort of forced competition between the two that I never felt was actually real.
Yeah, that's the thing I don't get about maximalists is why it has to be one and not, anything else. Just Bitcoin is great. I think it's amazing. It's a global payment network that, that's huge. But I don't quite understand the folks that don't see the value in, say, Ethereum or Avalanche or any smart platform that you want to talk about. Um, but so I want to get back to Hyperledger, but so I was looking at Twitter, and you're quite a prolific retweeter. You don't put out much yourself, which, coming from a corporate background, I think I understand why. I remember getting dinged at Bloomberg a couple times for tweets that I put out, and it just made me so fucking mad that they were telling me to delete stuff. But it was mostly political things, I think, around. But so you're quite a prolific retweeter, and perusing your feed, I would almost come away thinking you might be a Bitcoin maximalist. Am I far off on that?
Not too far off. No, I mean, it's been a journey from getting into Bitcoin to exploring other things and then really coming back to Bitcoin. Not that I ever, doubted Bitcoin in the medium term. For me, really, it's, as you say, there's not just one application, but money is the biggest and the most interesting application. And to me, looking at the long term in the next 15 to 20 years, I think we have seen a Cambrian explosion of different blockchains, different approaches, different functionality. But ultimately, my guess, right, and it is just an educated guess, is that really the platform that wins money will end up winning pretty much every other use case that at least is financial or involves trading, right? Money is always, it's one half of every transaction pretty much. And nailing a neutral, global internet native money at the base layer, that is the most secure and the most censorship resistant. And I don't think many would argue that Bitcoin's not that. And then building layers on top of that will enable different, more functionality, rather than trying to cram all of that functionality into the base layer. There's no exact clear definition of what a maximalist is, but my view of it is that long term, the best money wins, and really that needs the most well secured blockchain, and then other pieces will be built on top in different layers.
And you're talking about the base layer, so that would be Bitcoin in this example, and then maybe a layer two for that would be like Lightning, the Lightning network, with payments using like much faster than the 10-minute or so transaction, time it takes for a Bitcoin transaction to clear. Do you think, like with your experience at Hyperledger and then at Digital Asset, do you think the smart contract platforms have that same capability, or it seems like you're thinking or betting on Bitcoin maybe in the long run being that chain that people are using?
Yeah, I think it depends on what sort of time horizon we're talking about. Maybe it'll be 15 years, maybe it'll be on 50 years. Who knows? And I don't think it's certainly going to be. There's not going to be one platform for every single application under the sun. Not everything needs to be single-threaded. Just looking at it from the context of money as a starting point and then money-related applications being built around that. I think where a lot of the so-called enterprise blockchain space actually ceased to be blockchain many years ago, both with Digital Asset and with R3, who are another big player in that space with their Corda platform. They and us, and actually the original Hyperledger back in 2014, we didn't use the word blockchain because it was, it achieved a similar sort of thing in terms of synchronizing data and having multi-party workflows. But turns out those weren't good marketing terms that got people writing and interested. So the space sort of got forced back into using, incorrectly in many cases, using the term blockchain to, because that's what people thought it was.
Yes, I remember on Wall Street, for example, and within the higher ups at Bloomberg News, they were really hesitant to Bitcoin because they thought, they just associated it with scams and with, Silk Road or Mt. Gox or whatever it was back at the time. And it took a lot to, I think, bring those folks around. and a lot of, I think, people still in the media, they're quite traditionalist, and so a lot of the media has a kind of, I think, a vested interest in the status quo kind of continuing.
Hmm.
Um, but I was wondering if did you work with Jonathan Levy at all at Hyperledger?
Yeah, from Hasera.
Yeah, I think he helped create the Hyperledger fabric.
Yeah,
It-
yes.
yeah. So funny story about, I went to Burning Man a couple years ago for my book. I wanted to finish the reporting of the book at Burning Man. So I'm there at this decentral campground where they're Green is this guy. He's just a force of nature trying to bring the Burning Man folks and the crypto folks together, because I think he's onto something, that there's a lot of shared kind of ethos there between those two groups. And so I'm in this yurt out in the Black Rock Desert, and Jonathan Levy is there, and he's like leading this discussion, and there's maybe like 8 people in this yurt, and I figure out who the guy is, and I'm like, I wanted to tell everybody, I'm like, holy shit, this is like, you're really lucky to be sitting, cross-legged, like 3 feet away from this guy, because this guy's a monster. That's not really what you do at Burning Man, so I just kept my mouth shut. But that was a fun.
Oh, that's amazing. Just total coincidence. You didn't know he was going to be there and bumped into
No,
him, or
no, I
yeah,
hadn't.
wow.
Well, so Green had brought him in, and he was like one of the
Okay.
featured speakers. And there were people in this yurt who like really had no idea what blockchain was, and they were just asking, very, good questions, but they were, new to it. And I'm like thinking, wow, you do a lot worse for somebody to explain this to you than Jonathan Levy. So that was
Lucky
that,
people
that's
indeed. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's something that stuck with me. Um, so then let's talk about you going to Digital Asset and what they were up to at the time. When did you join with them, and what was the sort of bigger context at that point, as you recall?
Yeah. So Hyperledger, the company, was basically just 2 of us and some part-time people from around the space who were helping out, and I think Digital Asset was probably around 20 people or so. Primarily based in New York, but a couple of places around the world too. So we, not coming from the finance world, hadn't heard of, that much about Blythe Masters prior to Digital Asset, but had heard, Superstar from JP Morgan has got into the blockchain space. And that was really still, I think, to a lot of people who were around at the time, one of the biggest sort of validations that, okay, this isn't just for nut jobs and criminals, someone's taking it seriously, and maybe I should too. So we didn't really know much about what they were up to. They literally just sort of stealthily launched. We happened to be going through New York for part of the Swift Inner Tribe Startup Challenge, and a VC, actually Brian Selkis, we were talking to at the time, sort of connected us and said we should have a meeting.
Ryan, really?
Yeah,
For listeners,
yeah,
he went on to start Masari, which
yeah,
is doing very well.
indeed. And yeah, and so we were in the same spaces. We were a little bit more focused on the blockchain piece. They were focused on the smart contract piece, or the applications building on top of it. And then it pretty quickly, to both sides, we sort of hit it off, and really, and the views about what we needed to do were pretty similar. So it became a choice of, should we both go alone and compete, and or should tiny startup join larger startup, and yeah, pretty quickly that we decided on the latter.
Yeah, funny story about Blythe Masters. That's so I co-wrote a magazine, a cover story of the Bloomberg Markets magazine with Blythe, and
Yes,
she was on the
that was
cover.
the blockchain, not Bitcoin tagline on the front page, right?
I think it's something that was like, it was like Blythe Masters wants to tell you about the blockchain or something. I've had many people on Wall Street tell me in the years since that was the thing, that magazine story really turned the tide and got them into it, or like kind of convinced a lot of bankers that there was something here and that they should start exploring it. And Blythe, yeah, she is a force of nature. She was amazing, and has had an amazing career. So then, now, so And then you guys made pretty big waves, as I recall, and I reported on this quite a bit at the time when you landed ASX down in Australia, who owns the Australian Stock Exchange, and they were going through a revamp of their market structure, basically for their stock exchange. Can you tell me a little bit about that from an insider, what that was like?
Yeah, it was quite an incredible journey. So from originally two guys in China exploring blockchain to all these banks piling in to joining Blade Master startup to sitting in a room with executives from a top 10 stock exchange, and we had to sort of start pinching ourselves and asking, is this really happening? Is this, a serious, are they being serious? And they were, absolutely, we're not,
Is this a hidden camera TV show? Yeah.
pranking us.
Yeah.
And they used an Australian version of the phrase, we're not messing around, which I hadn't heard before, which involves some expletives. And pretty quickly it went from, they were in New York and there was a few of them exploring but serious, to us flying down to Sydney and spending a whole week inside the ASX exchange building, putting together a prototype based on working hand in hand with their team, to us presenting it to their board at the end of that week. That was for the obviously an initial prototype as part of the vendor selection stage, and then there was another year or so of prototyping before they actually made the decision to move ahead with the project. But that was definitely the biggest thing that happened in the space at that time.
What I always found really interesting was that the Australian Stock Exchange, the shares were already digitized, right? They were digital entities, and that's how they traded. And so what we're talking about here wasn't introducing a blockchain for the trading of the stocks, because that's way too slow, would never work. But it was in the clearing side on the back end where you had to move the money and then move the shares. And in the United States, for example, the BCC, that I think it's 2 days now, right, before the money in your shares moved around.
Down to 2, yeah.
Yeah, so it used to be 3, and back in the day, we're flying around. But so the infrastructure was there at the Australian Stock Exchange because it was already like half digital, and I know that project's still going on, but I think it's hit some road bumps. But that must have been pretty amazing to be on the inside of that, because it did really grab a lot of people's.
Yeah, I think that was as mentioned, sort of Blythe coming into the space was one point of validation, and then that was another significant one for the world of finance. That it's not just hype, it's not just excitement. It was getting real, and as you say, it was a dematerialized market, so already fully digital. Chess, which is the current system, was about 20 years old, but was still working pretty well. And they saw it as an opportunity of, to upgrade their existing systems, as you say, post-trade, so not actually touching the exchange piece, but clearing and settlement, which was the sort of primary, it was the use case that had the most interest in the blockchain space at the time.
So staying on the exchange topic, you then, digital asset, you went to Bakkt, which is, might not be familiar to some people, so I'll just give a little background on it. So it's started as a project of Intercontinental Exchange, has exchanges all over the world now, in London and New York, and they started in energy, but then quickly expanded into things, financial markets. And then, but I was always wondering when I was reporting on them, because like CME, one of their competitors, had sort of jumped into crypto, and other big markets had also done some things there. But Intercontinental just was sort of sitting on the sidelines, and then it came out with this idea about Bakkt, which was something that people have been calling for a long time, which was a futures market where if you go in and you buy a contract, so you buy a Bitcoin future contract on Bakkt, if you held it to expiration, you would actually get delivered to you actual Bitcoin. A lot of all the other contracts out there at the time were financially settled, so you would just get the dollar value of, and that, I know that was a big deal, and I know you weren't there at the time, and we'll talk about how Bakkt is sort of like expanded into what it's doing. But Just curious, like what you've learned by being on the inside there about that time and about like some of the decisions and just how that all played out. Cause that was another sort of, I think, leap forward here in terms of, real quick, like if I'm an institutional investor and I'm worried about but I want to build some Bitcoin, but I don't want to get into a situation where I don't know who my counterparty is. If I can go to a regulated entity like Bakkt and buy, these futures on a US market that will then turn into actual Bitcoin at the end of the contract, that was huge, right? That was always the big, the selling point here was that this was a way for, didn't have to risk your reputation or getting into regular if you wanted to build a crypto portfolio.
Absolutely, yeah. So that was, yeah, as you say, before my time. I joined about a year and a half ago, and Bakkt's around 4 years old. But spinning out of ICE, who have a large, commodities, futures exchanges, businesses.
And
As you
the New
said,
York Stock
the
Exchange.
physically settled piece.
Yeah. Let's not
They
forget about
also
the New
own
York
the New
Stock
York Stock
Exchange.
Exchange, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, as you said, right back then it was institutional investors aren't just pitching up to retail consumer exchanges or OTC desks, and they wanted a way to acquire Bitcoin in a regulated, safe way. And the physically delivered piece of that, as you say, essentially means at the end of the contract expiry, you actually get delivery, you get sent the Bitcoin rather than just the cash value of the Bitcoin. So it was a way to safely and to acquire Bitcoin through an end-to-end regulated, trusted, serious exchange. However, there were, some challenges because of that physical delivery pieces with, the wider market, that it was perhaps a little bit before its time. Whilst, the product was really well designed and had demand. Some of the FCMs, who needed to come on board to actually enable this to a wider market, weren't comfortable with Bitcoin just yet, and it's taken them some time to come around. And so, the financially settled contracts definitely got a larger portion of that volume, around the time.
Yeah, and it's surprisingly complicated. You would think, oh, I just need to send the Bitcoin to whoever holds, but there's so many things that are, we won't get into them here, but it is quite complicated and risky, because even to this day, custodianship for digital assets is, quite a risky business, and, a lot of things can go wrong, and that's not, thinking about a State Street or one of the custodians, they're very conservative and don't want to have a lot of, I think, ways for things to go wrong. At least that's my take on it from the outside.
Yeah, and I think also going to the, not to go into the sort of FTX and crypto collapse piece, but one of the things that you mentioned, market structure, right? That's something that isn't necessarily paid a ton of attention to until it's important. And work at Digital Asset with exchange groups on the post-trade side, right? I learned more about clearing and settlement and market structure than I probably had desired to. But it's really interesting to see how a lot of what
market
is
structure is
unfolding
sexy.
in the crypto space is separation of concerns between clearing and settlement and custody and exchange and stuff that clearly really matters, because as we've seen is a very important piece, and getting that right within the crypto space, I think, is an important thing for the industry, at least for institutional adoption and mainstream consumer adoption.
So there were hints of this at the time too, and I know but joined, but like Brecker would come out and talk about plans, or Kelly Loeffler would say, they were always, I think, like Starbucks was an early partner, and I know that they were thinking about how can we get crypto into like the payments, sort of, not payments, but into how, just everyday people are going to use, crypto to buy stuff. And I think, that's taken a little while too, but can you talk just like, cause I know that's a big now part of what Bakkt is doing, is trying to help companies that want to integrate crypto in into their customer base or whatever, or you've got rewards and loyalty programs. Can you just kind of walk us through where that is now, and how you see it sort of in the next couple of years?
Yeah, I think back generally speaking, our goal is to drive utility, or actually to enable people to get value out of these assets, not just as a store of value or an inflation hedge or for means of speculation, but these things were created to do something. And the speculation that exists today is speculation that one day they will be used for those things, and not just a number go up and down, make some money, get in and out. Bitcoin originally was created as a peer-to-peer electronic cash, and not just a buy it and put it in your hardware wallet and get rich.
It's one of the first sentences or the subhead, yeah.
I think, actually in the headline, yeah. And so the Starbucks piece and the payment piece is a start of that. So Bakkt, is a platform that end consumers probably won't know or see. We are behind some partners who enable it for their consumers. So a portion of that is doing the custody, so that our partners don't have to rebuild a crypto custody solution, which, as you say, is not easy, and also well regulated as well. So not every entity can get into that. Or wants to get into that, and then enabling them to offer their consumers custody, trading, payouts, rewards, and payments in some cases as well, and moving more and more towards the mainstream users and adoption and utility than just the early adopter exchange trading use cases.
And are you guys still working with Starbucks? Because I know they got some attention recently for they're trying out, right, a part of their rewards program that's crypto based. Is that still a partnership that you guys are on?
We're still live with them in the US on iOS for Pay with Bitcoin. So that is still live today in the Starbucks app. We haven't been involved in the Odyssey web portion of that they're in beta at the moment with.
Yeah, that's right. Is it NFTs that they're doing, something like that, where you get loyalty NFTs?
It is, yeah. I mean, they've renamed NFTs as stamps, so I think they're sort of taking a little bit of a optical step back from the NFT market, but it's a way to participate and earn points and redeem them for NFT type collectibles.
A lot of people are doing that. They're steering away from NFT as using it as a term, like in the music kind of Web3 world. A lot of like musicians still feel like, and they don't want to be associated with it, so they'll have Web3 streaming or something like that in the music, but they'll call it something different. But kind of back to the blockchain, not Bitcoin.
Yeah, and I think ultimately, right, it's got to be just about the value that it provides, and not NFTs get a lot of attention, blockchain got a lot of attention because of what it was, not proving out the value, and so we got to get back to that.
And where do you see this going, like with customer rewards or loyalty? Is it using crypto rails to do things that we already do? Is that the efficiency here, or like what is the what's the problem you guys are hoping to solve for here?
I think that there's a couple of pieces. There's how do you get crypto beyond the diehards like us who live in a bubble and already get it into the hands of mainstream everyday users? And it's often easy to forget. I know there's a meme sort of how early we still are, but most normal people still have never actually held crypto or used it for something. So how do we make it more palatable and usable and provide that value to the end user, whether they know they're using crypto under the hood or not? So one of the areas I'm most excited about there, as you mentioned earlier, Lightning as a layer 2 payments network for Bitcoin is a new alternative payment rail that can compete with traditional debit, credit, ACH, wire rails, but do it a lot faster for almost for free.
Because that's basically they batch transactions off chain, right? Transactions, and then they only go on for certain things. Is that like that's the way that it's like getting a bar tab? I think it was explained to me one time, like you don't pay every time.
That's a good analogy. Yeah, so you can go back and forth sending each other provable promises to pay that can actually be enforced, and then you can choose when you want to settle up and close out the tab and get the Bitcoin on chain.
And then interestingly, like just the other day, there's now we were speaking about NFTs. They're starting to do NFTs on the Bitcoin blockchain. With
They are. That's been a bit of a controversy. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, people are talking about maximalist. That's kind of like making some people's heads explode. Um, but and yeah, so it seems to me that there's a thread here where been working for big groups where like going back, Hyperledger got involved with like a lot of like, well, digital asset for sure was working with big firms, and now at Bakkt, you're trying to appeal to some of the world's largest corporations and trying to get them to see how they can integrate crypto into their like daily business. How's that going? Like, are you optimistic here about that? Is the winter we're in right now having, is it putting pressure on that, or is this a time where you guys are building, or how do you see the big picture right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's not the first crash, right, that we've been through. It probably won't be the last either. So I think, generally speaking, most of the large companies that are taking it seriously now have been taking it seriously long enough that they're aware that these things happen in the early days as it matures, and it is still pretty volatile, and there is still a lot of I don't hesitate to say fluff, but a lot of clearly in recent cases poor business practices all the way to criminal fraud. So ensuring that they're working with a partner that is highly regulated. We're a public company ourselves, like super highly audited, regulated by the New York Department of Financial Services with BIT license and trust license. So the types of companies that choose to work with, ICE-backed public companies that are highly regulated, understand that we're not subject to a lot of the challenges that the wider space has seen, and I think our value in that position has grown stronger over the course last year. As people, when times are good, it doesn't matter so much, what you're investing in or who you're working with. It only matters when things go wrong. So I think long term, it's a positive for the industry to have more of a clear out of some of the less well run or more speculative spaces, and then of course it'll slow down in the interim. But I think it's positive for the industry and largely positive for Bakkt in the long term as well.
Can't imagine what it must have been like, and I'm not going to ask you to opine on this, probably won't, but from inside a regulated exchange to seeing what happened with it. And just the utter show that
it was quite a few months. I mean, still is quite something. Yeah,
for sure. And it feels to me, for the first time in a while, that things, like you're saying, maybe I think most everything's been cleared out. That was sort of teetering, or the rumor mill was Genesis was the last one to declare bankruptcy. Maybe Currency Group might have something of a hangover there. I don't know, but I don't know if you agree, but it feels to me like we have turned a corner from 2022 and all of the centralized failures that we saw, and the over leverage and the credit market that really got everybody into trouble. Do you think, are you picking up on that at all? Do you think things are starting to kind of come around?
I think in the medium term, yes, that the crypto market generally has a pretty short memory, and things do, once there is a big clear out, things do start to improve relatively quickly. I wouldn't necessarily say it's the last. Maybe
I'm not saying that.
Other than a few.
No, there'll be more. We just don't know where.
There will be more, yeah. But yeah, I think for that particular piece on the lending side and the criminal exchange activity, it's definitely that should be the last, hopefully, that we see of it in the next year at least.
Yeah. Well, yeah, when you've been around this as long as we have, it's amazing how resilient crypto is and all the things that it can absorb and going still. I am continually amazed by that. Going
Yeah.
back to Mount Gox or whatever, you can, like, there's a long history here of dead bodies, but crypto is still moving forward and innovating.
The price will go up, it'll go down, there'll be, explosions in pockets of the market, but the true value is there and it is going to be realized and it's not going to go away. There'll just be, bumps along the way, but I think it's proven its resilience and anti-fragility, and it was designed to be attacked, right? If in some ways, the more attacks and more failures that happen, the more confident we can be about it because it's being tested in multiple different ways.
Yeah, that's a great point. A great point to end on. Dan O'Prey, you're the Chief Product Officer for Bitcoin and crypto at Bakkt. Everybody should go check out Bakkt, what they're doing. And Dan, tell folks where they can find you and where they can get more information on Bakkt.
Sure. Bakkt is at bakkt.com or bakkt on Twitter. And you can mostly find me on Twitter, Dan O'Prey.
Awesome. And speaking of Twitter, I like your profile pic with the laser eyes coming out. So that was not lost on me.
Real life laser eyes.
Yeah.
Got to keep them going.
And the diamond hands. Yeah. All right. Well, Dan, thanks so much. This has been a real pleasure, and thanks for being so generous with your time and sharing your experiences with us.
Not at all. Thank you so much, Matt. Really enjoyed it.
Well, hey, that's it for another episode of Decent People. Thanks so much for joining us. Make sure to hit that subscribe button. Check us out on the web at decential.io. We're on Twitter at Decential Media. Our shows are produced by Matt Solon. The music is courtesy of Brian Duncan and Kareem Imes. Thanks so much. Take care.